Good morning, boys and girls. Mrs. Ricker here, and it is week 2 of our quarantine, and I hope that you are all doing very well and that you are finding lots of activities, maybe some new activities like cooking or some new exercise activity video that you have found on YouTube or the internet that you are doing at home. I know I have found lots of new yoga videos that I am doing, which is a lot of fun. I've also been putting together some puzzles. I used to do puzzles a lot before I had kids, and so I went and bought a couple new ones, and I really liked doing that. And I certainly like making these videos, make me feel like I'm teaching a little bit, even though we're not in the classroom and we're not all together. Speaking of all together, a lot of teachers have been doing Zoom videos. Zoom is an app that you can put on a phone or a laptop or an iPad, and it allows people to meet together, and we can talk together and see each other all at the same time. So I'm thinking that that would be a good thing for us to do. Just to chat. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to teach anything, but just to see each other and kind of remember what we all look like and sound like. That might be a good thing for us to do. So if you have a device at home that you can do that, I would like you to ask your parents for the best time that we could all meet. Is it morning, is it afternoon, or is it evening when you could do that? And you might need some help from them at first, but maybe you won't because you are younger than me and probably better at technology. So just ask your parents best time to do that and get back to me, and we'll see when we could schedule a meeting. I'm also going to try to make a PowerPoint with some kind of math lesson, and I will put it here on our YouTube channel. It might take me a while to figure that out. I am just not a tech person, so I will try to do that. I think we need some review and refreshers of word problems and fractions, so we can get that started. Right now, though, I am going to read chapters 6 and 7 of Edward Tulane today. Chapter 6 is pretty short, so I'll read 2 chapters today. And I really, really hope that you are liking this book, because it might start out kind of okay, but it's going to get very adventurous very soon. And Edward is going to go through a lot in this book. So last we left off, Edward had been thrown overboard into the ocean by some very naughty boys that Abilene had met on the ship. And right before he was thrown overboard, if you remember, the boys had taken all of his clothes off. And Edward was so embarrassed because he was naked. So let's see what happens to Edward in chapter 6. Ready? How does a China rabbit die? Can a China rabbit drown? Is my hat still on my head? These were the questions that Edward asked himself as he went sailing out over the blue sea. The sun was high in the sky, and for what seemed to be a very long way away, Edward heard Abilene call his name. "Edward!" she shouted. "Come back!" Come back? Of all the ridiculous things to shout, thought Edward. As he tumbled, ears over tail through the air, he managed to catch one last glimpse of Abilene. She was standing on the deck of the ship, holding onto the railing with one hand. In her other hand was a lamp. No, it was a ball of fire. No, Edward realized. It was his gold pocket watch that Abilene held in her hand. She was holding it up high, and it was reflecting the light of the sun. My pocket watch, he thought. I need that. And then Abilene disappeared from view, and the rabbit hit the water with such tremendous force that his hat blew off his head. That answers the question, thought Edward as he watched the hat dance away on the wind. And then he began to sink. So I have a picture here. This is Edward sinking into the ocean. You see the ship in the background. You can imagine Abilene standing on the deck of the ship holding the gold pocket watch. And you see Edward without his fancy clothes on. Poor Edward. Do any of you feel sorry for Edward? Or do any of you feel like, maybe Edward got what he deserved because he was a rabbit who couldn't love, even though Abilene loved him very, very much? It's all in your opinion, isn't it? He sank and sank and sank. He kept his eyes open the whole time. Not because he was brave, but because he had no choice. His painted-on eyes witnessed the blue water turning to green and then to blue again. They watched as it finally became as black as night. Edward went down and down. He said to himself, if I am going to drown, certainly I would have done so by now. Far above him, the ocean liner, with Abilene aboard it, sailed blithely on, and the China Rabbit landed, finally, on the ocean floor, face down, and there, with his head in the muck, he experienced his first genuine and true emotion. Edward Tulane was afraid. Maybe now you're feeling a little bit bad for Edward. I know I am, because I don't like it when anybody feels afraid. It makes me very sad, and it makes me a little bit afraid for them. So with Edward at the bottom of the ocean and his face down in the muck of the bottom of the ocean, and it's pitch black, we knew that from one of our reading groups where we read about the bottom of the ocean, how it's pitch black. And now this little rabbit is afraid. But, guys, we're not very far through the book. So, we have to assume that our little Edward will survive. They're not going to get rid of the main character when we're only on chapter 6, right? Right. Okay, so chapter 7 starts with this picture. If you can't really tell what it is, it's a huge wave on the ocean. So kind of think about what that picture might mean. Authors will often put a picture to start the chapter of something that happens later in the chapter. He told himself that certainly Abilene would come and find him. This, Edward thought, is much like waiting for Abilene to come home from school. I will pretend that I am in the dining room of the house on Egypt Street, waiting for the little hand to move to the 3, and the big hand to land on the 12. If only I had my watch, then I would know for sure. But it doesn't matter. She will be here soon, very soon. Do you think Abilene is going to come and save him? Find him? Hours passed, and then days, and weeks, and months. Sort of like how I felt. I'm making a connection to the book right now. When I found out that we were not going to have school for a while, I thought about when I would see all 22 of you again, and even see the adults that I work with. See Mrs. Strong, see Mrs. Maggio, see Mrs. Russo, see Mrs. Hayes. When would I see them again? Well, the first few hours were okay. The first few days. And now we're on to week 2, and I am really trying to find ways that I can connect with you. And just the other day, Mrs. Russo set up a Zoom meeting, and there were about 15 teachers that we got to see each other on our laptops and talk together. So that was really, really good for us. Well, after months, Abilene did not come. Edward, for lack of anything better to do, began to think. He thought about the stars. He remembered what they looked like from his bedroom window. What made them shine so brightly, he wondered. And were they still shining somewhere, even though he could not see them? Never in my life, he thought, have I been farther away from the stars than I am now. He considered, too, the fate of the beautiful princess who had become a warhawk. Why had she become a warhawk? Because the ugly witch turned her into one. That was why. And then the rabbit thought about, try to fill in the blank with who he started to think about. The paragraph before that talked about the ugly witch turning the princess into a warthog. So who does Edward start to think about now? Did you say Pellegrina? You're right, Pellegrina. He felt in some way that he could not explain to himself that she was responsible for what had happened to him. It was almost as if it was she and not the boys who had thrown Edward overboard. Do you think Pellegrina would sort of do that kind of thing? Could she make that happen? Sounds like the author is putting a little bit of magic into the book. She was like the witch in the story. No, she was the witch in the story. True, she did not turn him into a warthog, but just the same, she was punishing him. Although for what? He could not say. Do you know what Pellegrina is punishing Edward for? Some of you might know. Some of you, we might need another couple chapters, but that's okay, because when I first read this book, I didn't know what she was punishing him for. But, really think about that. What was she disappointed in him about? What did she want him to be, to have? Think about that. On the 297th day of Edward's ordeal, a storm came. The storm was so powerful that it lifted Edward off the ocean floor and led him in a crazy, wild, and spinning dance. The water pummeled him and lifted him up and shoved him back down. Help! Thought Edward. The storm, in its ferocity, actually flung him all the way out of the sea. And the rabbit glimpsed, for a moment, the light of an angry and bruised sky. Can you picture what color the sky is? If it's bruised, think about a bruise you might have gotten. Black and blue. The wind rushed through his ears. It sounded to him like Pellegrina laughing. But before he had time to appreciate being above water, he was tossed back down into the depths. Up and down, back and forth he went, until the storm wore itself out, and Edward saw that he was beginning again his slow descent to the ocean floor. Oh, help me, he thought. I can't go back there. Help me. But still, down he went. Down, down, down. And then, suddenly, the great wide net of a fisherman reached out and grabbed the rabbit. The net lifted him higher and higher until there was an almost unbearable explosion of light. And Edward was back in the world, lying on the deck of a ship, surrounded by fish. Hey, what's this? Said a voice. Ain't no fish, said another voice. That's for sure. The light was so brilliant that it was hard for Edward to see. But finally, shapes appeared out of the light, and then faces. And Edward realized that he was looking up at two men, one young and one old. Looks like some toy, said the grizzled old man. He bent and picked Edward up and held him by his front paws, considering him. A rabbit, I reckon. It's got whiskers and rabbit ears, or the shape of rabbit ears at least. Yeah, sure, a rabbit toy, said the younger man, and he turned away. I'll take it home to Nellie. Let her fix it up and set it to rights. Give it to some child. The old man placed Edward carefully on a crate, positioning him so that he was sitting up and could look out at the sea. Edward appreciated the courtesy of this small gesture, but he was hardly sick of the ocean and would have been satisfied never to set eyes on it again. There you go, said the old man. As they made their way back to shore, Edward felt the sun on his face and the wind blowing through the little bit of fur left on his ears. And something filled his chest, a wonderful feeling. Wonder what that feeling could be. He was glad to be alive. Look at that rabbit, the old man said. Looks like it's enjoying the ride, don't it? Yup, said the young man. In fact, Edward Tulane was so happy to be back among the living that he did not even take umbrage at being referred to as it. Now, let's think about what we, the reader, know that the fisherman does not. So first of all, we know the rabbit is named Edward. The fisherman does not. We know that Edward always wore clothes. The fisherman does not know that. We know that Edward was always a very fancy rabbit from a very wealthy, rich family. The fisherman does not. So we know a lot about Edward that the fisherman doesn't. So can Edward tell him about his life? No, he can't, because Edward can't speak. But Edward feels, Edward thinks. So what do you think Edward will think about going home with the fisherman? So you can kind of predict here and think about what's going to happen when the fisherman takes Edward to his home. And we know that there's a woman there named Nellie. So we have to think, who might Nellie be? And if you've been picturing a fisherman in your head, I'm going to show you the picture that the illustrator drew. And when I look at it, I always think of that man on the Gorton's fish box. If you've gone to the grocery store and seen a box of fish that you can buy to eat, there's a fisherman on the box, and this guy looks like the Gorton's fisherman. So there he is. There's the fisherman that found Edward, and he's going to take him home. Now, does the fisherman look like a protagonist, positive, good character, or an antagonist, a negative character? Think about that also. So, next time we meet, we will read chapter 8. We're going to learn about the fisherman and Nellie and Edward's new life with them. So I hope you enjoyed chapter 6 and 7, and I will see you soon. Bye.